How avoidant men communicate differently. Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about something that affects so many relationships, yet most people don't even see it coming: the way avoidant men communicate differently. You ever feel like you're talking to someone, but they're not really there? Like there's a wall between you, an invisible force field that keeps them just out of reach? That's not an accident. That's not indifference. It's a survival mechanism. See, people with an avoidant attachment style learned early in life that relying on others can lead to pain. So what do? They create distance. They build independence. They make sure no one gets close enough to hurt them. Now, here's where the real challenge comes in. If you don't understand this, you'll take it personally. You'll think they don't care, but that's not the truth. The truth is their way of protecting themselves is by withdrawing, by minimizing emotions, by keeping interactions logical instead of emotional. Let me be clear, this is not about blame. This is about understanding. If you want to connect with an avoidant man, you've got to speak their language. You don't chase. You don't demand. You create a space of safety where they feel like they can step forward on their own terms. Most people try to force connection. That doesn't work here. The key is to influence, not impose, to create trust, not pressure. Because once an avoidant man feels safe, he starts to show up differently. He starts to engage, open up, and step into a deeper, more meaningful connection. Avoidant men often communicate in ways that seem distant, detached, or even indifferent, but this isn't because they don't care. It's because they've developed a pattern of creating space as a form of self-protection. For many, this behavior originates from early life experiences where emotional needs weren't consistently met. As a result, they learned that closeness could be unreliable or even dangerous, so they adapted by relying on themselves and minimizing emotional expression. This deeply ingrained pattern follows them into adulthood, shaping how they communicate in relationships. When interacting with an avoidant man, you might notice that he doesn't engage in deep emotional conversations as often as others do. He may keep responses short, factual, and devoid of much emotional depth. It's not that he doesn't have feelings, it's that he has learned to suppress them, believing that vulnerability leads to discomfort or loss of control. If a conversation starts moving into deeply emotional territory, he may change the subject, deflect with humor, or withdraw completely. This doesn't mean he isn't listening. It simply means he processes emotions differently. Another key behavior in his communication style is a preference for indirect rather than direct expression of emotions. He may show that he cares through actions rather than words. Small gestures like fixing something for you, remembering details about your likes and dislikes, or offering practical help could be his way of expressing affection. For someone who craves verbal affirmation and emotional validation, this can feel frustrating or even disappointing. But understanding this difference can help shift the way you interpret his behavior. In conflict situations, an avoidant man may become even more withdrawn. While others may want to talk things out and resolve issues immediately, he might shut down or need significant time and space before engaging. This is not an intentional rejection, but rather a coping mechanism. Emotional intensity can feel overwhelming to him, so his instinct is to create distance to regulate his internal state. Pushing him for immediate answers or emotional engagement in the heat of the moment will often backfire, making him retreat further. This pattern of communication is often misinterpreted as a lack of interest or investment in the relationship, but in reality, it's about self-preservation. Many avoidant men do care deeply, but their ability to express that care in ways that are easily recognizable to others is limited by their internal programming. Their need for independence and self-reliance means they often don't see the same value in verbal reassurance or emotional discussions that others might. Understanding this pattern is crucial in order to communicate effectively with an avoidant man. Instead of interpreting his distance as rejection, recognizing it as his way of coping with emotional situations can change how you approach the relationship. It's not about forcing him to open up or trying to change him. It's about creating an environment where he feels safe enough to engage at his own pace. When he feels that emotional connection doesn't come with pressure or demands, he may begin to open up in his own way. Rather than expecting constant emotional engagement, learning to appreciate his form of communication can lead to a more balanced and fulfilling connection. If he expresses care through actions rather than words, acknowledging and appreciating those gestures can reinforce the relationship rather than focusing on what's missing. Giving him space when he withdraws instead of chasing or demanding immediate engagement often results in him coming back on his own, ready to connect in a way that feels natural to him. Effective communication with an avoidant man isn't about forcing closeness. It's about understanding his rhythm and meeting him where he is. Once you shift from reacting emotionally to his distance and instead respond with patience and security, you create a foundation where trust can grow. Over time, as he feels safe, he may begin to communicate more openly, knowing that he won't be criticized or overwhelmed for his natural tendencies. This shift in approach can transform the relationship dynamic, allowing for deeper, more meaningful connection emotions to develop, avoidant men tend to prioritize logic over emotions in their communication, often making them seem detached or unresponsive in emotional situations. This isn't because they lack emotions, but because they have learned to process them internally rather than expressing them outward. From an early age, many avoidant individuals were conditioned to believe that emotions were either unimportant or unsafe to share. Whether through inconsistent caregiving, high expectations of independence, or emotional neglect, they adapted by suppressing their emotional needs and focusing on self-reliance. This pattern continues into adulthood, shaping how they communicate in relationships, friendships, and even professional settings. When engaging in conversations, an avoidant man may default to facts, logic, and rationality rather than personal feelings. If asked how he feels about a situation, he may respond with what he thinks rather than what he feels. For example, in a discussion about a conflict in a relationship, he might analyze the situation logically, explaining the circumstances, considering solutions, and minimizing emotions, rather than expressing his personal emotional response. This can be frustrating for a partner who values emotional expression because it can seem as though he is disconnected or indifferent. In reality, his detachment is a learned response designed to maintain a sense of control and avoid emotional overwhelm. This preference for logic over emotions can also be seen in the way avoidant men handle decision-making. While some people make decisions based on feelings or intuition, an avoidant man is more likely to analyze situations from a practical standpoint. If confronted with an emotional plea or a highly charged discussion, he may appear unresponsive or dismissive, not because he doesn't care, but because he is attempting to stay in a space where he feels comfortable, a space of reason, not emotion. He may even believe that addressing things logically is the best way to resolve issues, failing to recognize that emotional validation is just as important as problem solving in a relationship. In moments of emotional intensity, an avoidant man may shut down completely. Rather than engaging in emotional discussion, he might become silent, distracted, or physically withdraw from the situation. This is because strong emotional displays can feel overwhelming, triggering his instinct to retreat into a place of neutrality. In arguments, he may appear cold or unaffected, which can be deeply frustrating for someone who wants an emotional response. However, his lack of reaction doesn't mean he isn't feeling anything. Simply means he has learned to manage emotions by containing them rather than expressing them. 2. This pattern also influences how an avoidant man provides support to others. If a loved one is experiencing distress, he is more likely to offer practical advice or solutions rather than emotional comfort. Instead of saying, "I understand how you feel and I'm here for you," he may say, "Here's what you can do to fix the problem." While his intention is to help, this can come across as dismissive or unemotional to someone who is seeking validation rather than a solution. It's important to recognize that his instinct to fix things is his way of showing care. It's just not always delivered in the way others expect or need. For someone in a relationship with an avoidant man, understanding this tendency can lead to less frustration and more productive interaction. Expecting him to suddenly express emotions in a deeply vulnerable way may not be realistic, but recognizing the ways he does show care through actions, problem solving, or quiet presence can help bridge the gap in communication. Rather than demanding emotional expression, creating a safe and pressure-free space where he feels comfortable engaging at his own pace can gradually encourage more openness. Avoidant men are not emotionless. They simply have a different way of engaging with emotions. By recognizing that their preference for logic is not a rejection, but a form of self-regulation, it becomes easier to communicate with them in a way that fosters connection rather than conflict. Over time, as trust builds, they may begin to feel safer expressing their emotions more openly, knowing that they won't be judged or overwhelmed in the process. Avoidant men place a high value on independence, often seeing it as a core part of their identity. This deeply ingrained need for self-sufficiency influences how they communicate and engage in relationships. Rather than relying on others for emotional support, they tend to process things internally, believing that handling problems on their own is the best way to maintain control. This mindset isn't about dismissing others or rejecting intimacy. It's a learned defense mechanism developed over time, often rooted in early experiences where emotional dependence was discouraged or unreliable. In relationships, this strong sense of independence can be mistaken for emotional unavailability. An avoidant man may not express a desire for constant closeness or reassurance, preferring to maintain a sense of autonomy even in intimate connections. He may feel uncomfortable with excessive emotional dependency from a partner, seeing it as overwhelming or even suffocating. Instead of viewing a relationship as a place for deep emotional merging, he sees it as a partnership where two individuals should remain self-sufficient while enjoying each other's company. This perspective affects how he communicates, especially when it comes to emotional expression. Unlike individuals who openly share their feelings and rely on emotional connection to strengthen bonds, an avoidant man often keeps his emotions private. He may not naturally verbalize affection, discuss his inner thoughts, or engage in deep emotional conversations. Instead, he demonstrates care through actions, problem solving, and maintaining stability in practical ways. To someone who values verbal affirmation and emotional closeness, this can feel distant or impersonal. However, from his perspective, maintaining a degree of emotional separation is not about a lack of love, but about preserving his sense of self. One of the key ways this need for independence manifests is in his reaction to emotional intensity. When faced with an emotional situation, whether it's a disagreement, a heartfelt conversation, or a moment of vulnerability, he may instinctively withdraw. This withdrawal isn't necessarily about avoiding responsibility or disregarding emotions. Rather, it's a way of regulating his internal state. Emotional closeness can feel overwhelming, triggering a need to step back and regain composure before re-engaging. This is why avoidant men often prefer space after conflicts rather than immediate resolution. Pressuring them to respond emotionally in the moment can feel intrusive and may push them further away. This independent mindset also influences how an avoidant man approaches problem solving in relationships. He tends to focus on practical solutions rather than emotional reassurance. If a partner expresses distress, he may offer logical advice or encourage self-sufficiency rather than providing comfort or validation. To him, this is a way of being helpful. It aligns with his belief that people should be able to handle their emotions independently. However, this approach can sometimes create distance, as it may not provide the emotional support that a partner is looking for. Recognizing this difference can help navigate communication challenges, allowing both partners to understand each other's needs without frustration. Another way his independence shapes communication is in his approach to commitments. Avoidant men are often cautious about making commitments that require deep emotional involvement. This doesn't mean they are incapable of commitment, but they may take longer to reach a point where they feel comfortable fully investing in a relationship. They may avoid discussions about the future, keep their emotions guarded, or prefer a slower pace in building intimacy. This can be misinterpreted as a lack of interest, but in reality, it's often about maintaining a sense of control over their emotions and personal space. For those in relationships with avoidant men, understanding this independence is key to fostering a stronger connection. Rather than pushing for emotional depth or forcing conversations about feelings, creating an environment of trust and respect for their need for space allows them to open up gradually. Instead of viewing their independence as a barrier to connection, recognizing it as part of their communication style can lead to more effective and fulfilling interactions. When they feel safe and unpressured, they may begin to share more freely, knowing that their autonomy is respected rather than threatened. Avoidant men tend to withdraw when they feel pressured in relationships, especially when it comes to emotional closeness or deep conversations about feelings. This reaction is not a conscious effort to hurt or push people away, but rather a deeply ingrained defense mechanism designed to maintain emotional stability. From an early age, many avoidant individuals learn that emotional vulnerability could lead to disappointment, rejection, or loss of control. As a result, they develop strategies to protect themselves, one of which is creating distance when they sense too much emotional demand. This pattern becomes especially noticeable in romantic relationships, where emotional connection is often a priority. A partner who seeks intimacy, reassurance, or deep conversations may notice that an avoidant man starts to pull away when emotional engagement is expected. He may become distant, unresponsive, or change the subject when conversations turn personal. This is not necessarily because he doesn't care, but because too much emotional intensity can feel overwhelming. To him, distance feels safer than engagement because it allows him to regulate his emotions without feeling trapped or vulnerable. The more pressure he feels to open up, the more likely he is to withdraw. If a partner asks, "Why don't you ever tell me how you feel?" or insists on immediate emotional discussions, his instinct is often to retreat further. He may not have the words to express his emotions in the moment, or he may fear that opening up will lead to expectations he's not comfortable fulfilling. In some cases, he may even become defensive, shifting the focus away from himself to avoid feeling exposed. This can create a frustrating cycle where one person pushes for connection while the other pulls away in response. Avoidant men also tend to be highly sensitive to perceived criticism, especially when it comes to their emotional responses. If they feel that their way of handling emotions is being judged, or that they are being forced into uncomfortable conversations, they may shut down completely. This is why approaching them with direct emotional demands often leads to more resistance rather than connection. They may see emotional pressure as a loss of control, and their instinct is to regain that control by putting up walls. Another way pressure creates resistance is in how avoidant men handle conflict. Unlike those who feel a need to resolve issues quickly through open discussion, an avoidant man often prefers to step back and process things on his own. If he is pressured into a conversation before he is ready, he may become irritated, detached, or even more distant. He may see emotional confrontations as overwhelming or unnecessary, leading him to shut down rather than engage. This can be frustrating for a partner who wants immediate reassurance, but understanding his need for space can help prevent unnecessary tension. This avoidance of emotional pressure extends beyond relationships and into other areas of life. In friendships, an avoidant man may not be the person who shares personal struggles openly or seeks out emotional support. At work, he may prefer independent projects over team collaborations that require deep interpersonal connections. Even in family dynamics, he may be less likely to engage in emotional discussions, choosing instead to focus on practical topics. Recognizing this tendency can help set realistic expectations for how he communicates and connects with others. The key to building a better connection with an avoidant man is to create an environment where he does not feel pressured to engage emotionally on demand. Rather than pushing him to open up, allowing him to express himself in his own way through actions, time spent together, or indirect expressions of care can lead to a more natural and sustainable connection. Instead of demanding deep conversations in emotionally charged moments, giving him space to process and come back when he is ready can help him feel more secure in the relationship. Over time, as trust builds and he feels safe, he may begin to share more openly without feeling the need to retreat. For an avoidant man, emotional safety is the foundation of trust in any relationship. While some people build connections through deep conversations and frequent emotional exchanges, avoidant individuals need to feel secure in their independence before they can truly open up. Their tendency to withdraw or keep emotions private is not about a lack of care, but about self-protection. If they perceive a relationship as emotionally demanding or expectant, their instinct is to create distance. However, when they feel safe, meaning they are not pressured, judged, or forced into vulnerability, they become more willing to engage in deeper emotional connection. One of the key elements of creating emotional safety for an avoidant man is respecting his need for space. Many avoidant individuals grew up learning that emotional closeness could lead to disappointment or rejection. As a result, they developed a habit of self-reliance, believing that they must handle emotions privately rather than leaning on others. When a partner pushes too hard for closeness, constantly asks about feelings, or seeks immediate reassurance, it can feel suffocating. However, when they are given space without guilt or pressure, they often return on their own terms, feeling more comfortable in the relationship. Another important aspect of safety for an avoidant man is consistency. He needs to know that the person he is opening up to will not suddenly change the rules or react unpredictably when he does express himself. If an avoidant man takes the risk of sharing his emotions, only to be met with criticism, demands for more, or an emotionally charged reaction, he will retreat even further. To him, this reinforces the idea that vulnerability is dangerous. On the other hand, when he is met with understanding and acceptance, he starts to trust that opening up does not lead to loss of control. Avoidant men also need to feel that they are not being judged for their natural communication style. Many people assume that deep emotional discussions are the only way to show care, but for an avoidant individual, emotions are often expressed differently. He may show love through small actions, consistency, or problem solving rather than words. If these gestures are dismissed or overlooked, he may feel unappreciated, reinforcing his desire to withdraw. A partner who recognizes and values these alternative ways of expressing care helps create an environment where he feels safe to connect in his own way. Patience is another crucial factor in establishing trust with an avoidant man. Unlike those who are naturally expressive, he may take longer to process emotions and communicate them. Pressuring him for immediate responses or deep emotional engagement can make him feel trapped. Instead, allowing him to open up at his own pace removes the pressure and creates a sense of emotional security. Over time, as he realizes he won't be forced into uncomfortable emotional situations, he may begin to share more willingly. Handling conflict in a way that maintains emotional safety is also essential. Avoidant men often struggle with emotional intensity, especially during arguments. If conflicts escalate into highly emotional exchanges, their instinct is to shut down, withdraw, or minimize their involvement. To build trust, it's important to approach disagreements calmly, focusing on solutions rather than overwhelming emotions. If he feels that conflict leads to stress and emotional demands, he will avoid engaging altogether. However, if he learns that disagreements can be handled in a respectful, balanced way, he will feel safer expressing his perspective. Over time, as an avoidant man experiences a relationship where he is not pressured, judged, or overwhelmed with emotional expectations, his trust in the connection deepens. When he feels secure, he begins to engage more naturally, expressing emotions in ways that feel comfortable for him. The key to unlocking deeper connection is not to demand emotional openness, but to create an environment where he feels safe enough to step forward on his own. At the core of understanding how avoidant men communicate differently is recognizing that their behaviors are not about rejection or lack of care, but rather about self-protection. They have learned to prioritize logic over emotions, value independence, and withdraw when they feel pressure. While this can sometimes create challenges in relationships, it is not a sign of emotional unavailability. It is a different way of processing and expressing emotions. By creating an environment of emotional safety where they are not forced into vulnerability or judged for their natural communication style, they can slowly begin to open up. Avoidant men may not express love in conventional ways, but their actions often speak louder than words. When they feel secure, they engage more naturally, building trust and connection in a way that aligns with their emotional framework. For those navigating relationships with avoidant individuals, patience, understanding, and respect for their boundaries are the keys to unlocking deeper connection. Rather than forcing emotional intimacy, allowing space for it to develop organically creates the strongest and most lasting bonds. Thank you all for taking the time to explore this important topic. Understanding different communication styles is the foundation of stronger, healthier relationships. If we can approach each other with compassion rather than frustration, we can build connections that honor both our needs and those of the people we care about. I appreciate your time, energy, and openness to learning today. Thank you.